Inwood, New York City, welcome to Inwood Art Works On Air. It's where we meet musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes that make their home in what we affectionately call Upstate Manhattan. I'm your host, Aaron Sims, and this is Live and Local, our podcast dedicated to showcasing the musicians of Upper Manhattan. We talk to them about what they do, and best of all, listen to them perform live in one of our favorite local venues. Today, we are excited to speak and listen to local musician Tom Nelson. Tom is a pianist, composer, arranger, and bandleader. He is a busy freelance musician performing with some of the top jazz and classical musicians in New York City. He is also the house pianist at the University Club. Tom performs all styles of music ranging from classical to jazz to rock to Broadway, but is especially fond of the Great American Songbook repertoire featuring songs from composers such as George Gershwin, Cole Porter, and Richard Rodgers. Born in Logan, Utah, Tom received a Bachelor's of Jazz Studies from the University of Northern Texas and a Master's of Jazz Composition from the Manhattan School of Music. He has composed works for string quartet, jazz orchestra, and chamber jazz ensemble, songs for soprano, violin, and piano, and composed for small jazz ensembles as well. He is active as a musical director on the New York cabaret scene and works as a rehearsal pianist and dance accompanist. He lives here in Inwood with his wife and 2 daughters. Ladies and gentlemen, we are thrilled to have him play for you today. Enjoy, Tom Nelson. Tom, thank you so much for being here today with us. It's wonderful to have you. And can you tell us what you just played for us today?
That was a composition that is a favorite of jazz musicians. It's called On Green Dolphin Street. And it's from a movie that came out in the 1950s, I think, by the same name.
Yes, it was.
And Miles Davis was, I believe, one of the first musicians to record it with Bill Evans and Cannonball Adderley and John Coltrane. And he made it very famous. And it's just got a great chord progression to improvise over, and that was my spontaneous Saturday morning arrangement.
Love it, love it. Actually, a buddy of ours, do you know Lou Bruno, a local bass player in the neighborhood as well?
I know the name. I have not met Lou.
He actually, we did a concert of his at another church here, Good Shepherd, when we did Jazz from the Movies, and on Dolphin Street was one of those, actually. So apparently Inwood loves this movie. And what was the second piece?
The second piece was a song called I'm Glad There Is You, which is I guess you could call it a pop song from the 1940s, I believe. Jimmy Dorsey or Tommy Dorsey, probably the Dorsey brothers, had a big hit with it. It's a sentimental wartime song. When everyone was missing the soldiers that were overseas, and there were a lot of love songs written about, lonely love, etc. But it's also another one that has become a jazz standard. Not as well known, though. It's a more obscure part of the Great American Songbook, and I thought I would play it today as something lesser known.
Love it. We love introducing people to great music. My, how pop music has changed in the past 50, 70 years, right?
Absolutely.
Where do you stop in your pop music, in your repertoire?
Well, I definitely go up to Elton John and Billy Joel, and even further, into the 80s and 90s. Rap is really hard to do on solo piano, if not impossible, because there's no real harmony.
And the sampling's tough, too.
Yes. So, but as far as improvising and having a good vehicle for a jazz musician, even Billy Joel, Elton John, the Beatles, their music is hard. It's been done, but the Great American Songbook at its height, composers such as Gershwin, Porter, Berlin, they were very closely related to jazz. The style of jazz was the pop music. So they were writing songs that had jazz progressions and could be, altered, done in a different meter, maybe, a different tempo, slow, fast, change it up. A song like Just the Way You Are by Billy Joel is something that can be improvised on. I've heard it done, but you don't really change it into something, totally different, which you can do with the Great American Songbook. Yeah. So I definitely go up into the rock and roll era. But when I want to improvise on something, I do not choose those songs.
I don't blame you. Yeah, because those songs are kind of original to themselves, and the more closely you have to follow them.
Yes, you have to play it as almost like a classical piece of music in a way. You can't do a lot of variations, or people start going, "What's he doing to my song?" It doesn't work.
Well, thank you for them. They're absolutely gorgeous, and you're a hell of a player. Everyone loves a great origin story. So how did a young man from Utah find his way to the piano and also New York?
Well, I was raised in a musical family. My parents were both musicians. They met in the college band at Brigham Young University. And my mom played bass clarinet. My father played trombone. And I assume he probably maybe took his slide and never mind. Anyway, they got married very young and had 5 kids, and we all play at least 2 instruments. My father was a band teacher at the local high school, and my oldest brother started taking jazz piano lessons. We all had piano lessons. I rebelled and hated piano when I was in 4th grade and quit. So I taught myself as a teenager, but my older brother, Mike, actually used to play Green Dolphin Street. It still does to this day. He's a metallurgical engineer now in Salt Lake City. Oh. But a lot of good influences, a good university in our hometown with, good music teachers and a lot of very, very smart people, musicians. And so I ended up pursuing my dream and going to Texas first and then coming to New York and, throwing my hat in the ring. And I've been here 40 some odd years. Believe it or not.
That's incredible. I've only been here for 20 some odd years. Similar story.
Yeah.
My track was theater, not music. but there is music and theater, so that's a whole different story. So I have great compassion and empathy for one coming in from. I also came from the Midwest,
Okay.
so Cincinnati, Ohio, actually.
Right.
So I totally understand. And 40 years. And when did you come to Inwood?
My wife and I moved here in 1995. We migrated upstream where, all the yuppies were moving upstream to spawn, I suppose you could say, That's kind of crass, but
We can afford the apartment building,
yes,
right?
at that time there
more
were many
space.
empty apartments. There were very few kids in Inwood in 1995. And we moved here, almost 35 years ago, and or 30 years ago, and it's changed a lot, and I'm really glad to live here. It's a wonderful community, and you have the beautiful Inwood Hill Park to go and commune with nature in, and it's just a perfect place. 212 area code, but far enough from Midtown to be out of the mess.
Exactly. But you're still on the island. You can hop
Yeah.
on the subway.
Yeah.
Pretty easy to get where you want to go,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I feel I feel exactly the same way. Everything you said is true. But you don't not just a player. You're a composer as well.
Yes.
So when did you start composing? Was it 14 or was it quite beyond?
I started composing in high school, probably, just thinking of things, and I started late in music in a way. I played trumpet for a long time. I played the drums a little bit, and I quit piano lessons when I was young, and my parents said I would regret it for the rest of my life, and I don't know if I do, but I certainly don't have the facility of someone that played the piano. With classical music, you have to start really young.
Yeah.
But I learned jazz and then went back and learned to play classical music as well as a teenager, and I was always writing little things, but after I got my bachelor's degree, I moved to New York, and then I just decided I wanted to compose, and I sort of went for it, and I've composed 2 string quartets, and one was premiered at the Music Mountain Festival in Falls Village, Connecticut in 1996, and the second one was also premiered at the same venue. So I got a little traction there, and then had 2 children, and it sort of became more of a priority to raise the children and pass on to them my loves, which were music, nature, and literature, and the finer things in life. And so I haven't really done a lot of composing except when commissioned since for about 20 years. But I had a period of 15 years where all I did morning, noon, or night was think about composing. So.
Well, maybe we have to get some of your work out there and back in this community. Maybe we can get it going sometime.
A lot of good string players around here.
We have a lot of good string players around here. Hey, do your kids play too?
My daughter Johanna is a fine pianist, and my second daughter Christina is a fine pianist and a French hornist, and they both went to the special music school, which is at the Kaufman Center down by Lincoln Center, and
Wow.
had good musical training there, and neither has pursued music as a career,
Okay.
but they're both love to play, and their favorite thing to do is get together and play piano French horn duets, especially with around the holidays with
Well,
Christmas
maybe they're
music.
the next duo we have to have on the podcast.
Yeah.
The family Nelson. The Nelson family. Not to be confused with Ricky Nelson's family or anything like that. But, well, that's fantastic. With jazz comes a lot of improvisation, too. And it's funny hearing you playing those 2 pieces. Do you ever feel mentally where something is going to go when you're moving into a song? And sometimes we joke, you hit a quote unquote wrong note and it takes you somewhere else. But how? I guess the question I have is like, what freedom do you give yourself when you're playing and you're improvising through jazz?
That's a very hard question. It's very elusive, and just
There's no wrong answer, by the way.
no. But when I'm improvising, I actually almost leave the. This sounds kind of silly, but leave the planet in a way. It's another state of consciousness, but you have to be very prepared. You have to have done your 10,000 hours. They say someone has to do something for 10,000 hours to be proficient at it. You've heard that, right?
Yeah.
So you put in your 10,000 hours of learning, harmony, scales, form of music, keys, and music theory and everything, and classical music, jazz. Listen to all the master jazz players. You internalize that, and then when you go to play your solo, it just kind of comes out. The way you speak a language, almost like I'm not thinking about the words I'm saying right now because they're in my vocabulary. That's how jazz is. If you're a fluent improviser, you have a good vocabulary, But then the miraculous thing is what the mind does, and that's the creative urge. That's the beautiful thing, like Van Gogh, putting his paint. I'm not comparing myself to Van Gogh, but putting the paint on the canvas and where it leads you. So, and I did hit a few wrong notes in those takes that we're going to hear. But actually in the opening of Green Dolphin Street, in the melody, I hit a wrong note, but then I did it again. So I guess that makes it a right note, right?
It's not wrong until it's over.
But improvisation is really leaving the hurly-burly of everyday life and going into this place in your mind. I close my eyes when I play mostly, and just really I can't describe where it comes from. It's just sort of a stream, like you get on this stream and go with it.
And I can tell it physically affects you too.
Oh yeah,
it's awesome.
It does.
Takes you someplace.
Yeah.
Not just mentally, but physically.
My mother came to hear me years ago in a piano bar, and she said, "Did you know that you pull faces when you play and it looks like you're very unhappy?" And I said, "No, I didn't know that. Thanks, Mom."
It's like I had the best time of my life, Mom. What are you talking about? It wasn't until you were talking to me about this. Oh gosh. Well, you're very involved. Speaking of, you play out all the time, and as I mentioned, your bio, University Club, and all these different places, and privately. You were active in the cabaret scene for a long time, and just curious. So you've been here 40 years. How is not just cabaret, but as I know you're part of a lot of different scenes, the house scene and everything else, and the jazz scene. How has it changed since you've been here, and where do you see it going?
Well, like the culture of our country has changed incredibly, and all cultures do. I mean, you have these ups and downs. There are great highs of culture throughout history. Vienna in the late 1700s with Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn. Paris in the early 1920s with, there were Cole Porter and Gershwin, and people were over there. New York in the 40s and 50s, and I think New York in the 80s was still really good, and it lasted into the 90s. I've seen on Facebook people have put out the Old Village Voice, and they'll put out there were about 4 pages of jazz clubs that you could go to.
Right. Jazz,
rock, all kinds of things, all these great people that have now passed away playing live in New York. And that's sadly not happening now. I think it's the prices, it's just become overpriced.
Yeah.
So compared to when I came in 1982, it's a whole different world. Yeah. I was able to find a hotel room for $300 a month, which was a lot of money then, but you would never find anything for $300 a month now or comparable. It was on the west side, it was close to Juilliard. I was able to work my way into Juilliard as a dance accompanist, and they gave me a Juilliard ID, which then they asked for it back, and I told them that I got mugged, so I kept the ID. This is off the record, by the way.
Well, no one's going to hear this podcast, so don't worry about it.
So I was able to practice at Juilliard for about 7 years. It was great, but it's changed a lot, but there's still a jazz scene, a very active jazz scene, and since I became a family man, as they say, I don't go out at night. I just don't do the scene because that involves staying up all night, till 4 a.m, and then
you'll never see your family ever again.
You take your kids to school at 7, then the rest of your day is gone. So I made the choice of leaving the scene, as it were, and doing other things. But New York will always have a vibrant scene. There's no way around it. But I think it was much better 40 years ago.
Well.
Sadly,
I think you're right. Our neighborhood, for those who are paying attention, it's going to drastic change architecturally.
Yeah.
That also means financially.
Mm-hmm.
And so with the great commercial U, they call it Broadway, Dykeman to Broadway to 207.
Mm-hmm. That
all has been rezoned, as we know, throughout many Facebook posts and news articles, that people can keep building up and up and up. And, you have affordable housing with quotes on it saying, and define how affordable for whom.
Affordable.
Yes. And so I guarantee you they're not $300 apartments, folks.
No.
I believe the 1 bedrooms going across, right across us here, not the library building, but the one next to it are going for $2,500, something like that.
Yeah.
So, good luck from $300 to $2,500 in a span of 40 years. That's pretty rough for I truly say this with all my heart. I don't know where a young artist would live today in New York City coming from somewhere else as a teenager slash young 20s, mid 20s person. They're not living in Manhattan. I'll gamble to say, because you have to be able to be affordable. But the thing is, too, what is it? Kind of go back to your point about the scene, so to speak. Now it's like, what attracts people here? I mean, there's Broadway for, there's the Philharmonic for musicians. There's, we have, of course, the ballet, Lincoln Center. You have all these kind of like tent poles of larger. But is the cabaret scene really going strongly as it used to? Is there, like, without venues, like, there's less places to go and play and be seen, and like you saying, just being an artist, giving that opportunity to put in the 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
Somehow, some way. So a lot of people are going to Detroit, believe it or not, and they're going to, where you named it. I'm not going to say it. Albuquerque, New Mexico. People are going to.
I have another brother, Eric Nelson, who is a very good saxophonist. He was also a band teacher for 35 years, and he plays classical clarinet. He's the one that got me to go to North Texas State. He enticed me to come down and further my horizons from Salt Lake City. And he has since retired to Savannah, Georgia, and it's a very active scene there because the rent isn't like it is,
and they have a great college in there too, Savannah College of Art Design, down there.
But there's no place like New York. I mean, it's, I'm so glad that I'm in here, and I've always been able to make a living doing a lot of things that have really nothing to do directly with jazz, playing for dance classes, playing for, society parties and weddings. And,
well, kudos for you for being here and creating and making a living doing it, man.
Being a pianist, you have many different ways you can make a living,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of being a pianist, we have one more song to hear from you. What would you like to share next?
This is a song, a famous song, My Funny Valentine, and it has an interesting backstory because it was written by Richard Rodgers and Lorenz Hart. I don't remember the name of the show, but I one time heard the original version, and it was written in a light operetta style. My Funny Valentine, with people singing in high, funny voices, wearing wigs, and it was
musical theater.
Well, yeah, but it was forgotten. It was not even known. And Chet Baker, the famous and troubled jazz musician who had a really kind of a sad and tragic life due to his addiction to opioids and alcohol, he found the song somehow and changed it. See, that's why these songs written by these great composers in the 30s and 40s can be transformed into something totally different. He changed it into My Funny Valentine, sweet, something so deep and meaningful. And that's not how it was. It was very light and fluffy in the Broadway play. By the way, Richard Rodgers hated jazz. Irving Berlin didn't like jazz. Jerome Kern, they didn't like jazz because they hated when anyone would take their music and transform it.
Right.
Because they wanted, I wrote a B flat in the bass there leading to an A flat, and Chet Baker, he took that out. But they got the royalties from these guys.
Well, but they liked it when they got the check.
So I've taken My Funny Valentine, and everything I've performed today is totally off the top of my head. I had some ideas when I came in what I would do, but they kind of went out the window.
Well, like you're saying, you've done the work, you have a vocabulary, and you have to listen. As an artist, when you're on stage performing, you got to trust and let it go.
Well, you just have the blank canvas, and you put a little paint out on it, and see where the next brush stroke's going to go. But this time with this one, I did not do it as a ballad. I started it as a ballad, but then it became more of almost a Latin-flavored thing, and I put in a little of Chopin, Revolutionary Etude, left hand. I stole that from Chopin. A few people might notice that.
We won't tell Chopin
because they're both in C minor. So, well, that's public domain.
Absolutely.
So I can play
anything 95 years old now can be in public domain.
Yeah, 1920, 29.
There we are. How about that, ladies and gentlemen? If find your Valentine and send them this right now. My Funny Valentine.
But it's funny with quotes around the funny.
Yeah, exactly.
Odd Valentine.
It's very odd. Very odd. Tom Nelson's Odd Funny Valentine. Enjoy. Well, Tom, that was a wonderful improvisation on the old My Funny Valentine. And, it's February in 2025 here. And very fitting for the month. So, Tom, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Before we say goodbye, where can people go to find out more about you and any forthcoming projects or some of your past projects?
Well, my website is tomnelson.com, and we'll also put that up on the screen if I didn't get that right. But that has a lot of information and some tracks to listen to and so on and so forth. And that's probably the best place.
Well, listeners, you have your marching orders, tomnelson.com, all right? Well, again, Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to play and be here with us today. It's great having you.
I enjoyed it.
Me too.
A nice Saturday morning interchange.
It's a good way to start your day, right?
Yeah. That rhymes.
Use it in your next improvisation. So, again, thanks, Tom, for joining me on this live and local episode of Inwood Art Works On Air. And remember, folks, this is where we meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, and theater makers, and artists of all stripes make their home in what we affectionately call Upstate Manhattan. If you have a moment, please show us some love right now and share this with one of your friends and rate this podcast 5 stars on whatever platform you listen to. Many thanks to Holy Trinity Church here for hosting us and to Heightsides.com for uptown promotional support. You can support On Air and all of our programming by making a tax-free donation to inwoodartworks.nyc/donate or via Venmo at Inwood Artworks. Be sure to follow us on our social media channels to keep up all that we do, which includes the Inwood Film Festival, Filmworks Al Fresco, live concerts, pop-up art galleries, and so much more. Inwood Art Works On Air is proud to be supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, and Inwood Art Works programming is made possible by the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature. From the top of Manhattan and the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for tuning in. This is Aaron Sims for Inwood Art Works On Air.